What's up, y'all? Just some thoughts and reflections that I have tonight. Um, just have processed a lot of things over the last week or so. Um, so, my grandmother, my mom's mom, my last living grandparent transitioned about 12 days ago, I believe, from today. Um, from the day I'm recording this video, and that was on March the 4th of this year, 2022. So, I flew home to be with my family for the wake. My grandmother wanted, I think she didn't want a public viewing. So there was a private viewing of her body just for the immediate family. And then the day after, on that Thursday, we had a graveside service for her. And throughout this process, a lot of things came up for me. One of them being how much that all of us get from her, as far as her children, grandchildren, great grandchildren. And I thought about this for myself, especially. Now, I didn't know a lot of personal, information about my grandmother and her life, but some of the things that my mother said. My mother was the officiant of the service. And, speaking about some of her experiences with my grandmother and just some, characteristics and some things I knew about, but I was very young, so I hadn't, really conceptualized them. But I realized how many traits that I have in common of my grandmother, and that's always cool for me to see, and comforting for me to acknowledge when it comes to family in general. Other ancestors, my great aunts, other grandparents. I've been able to make some of those connections. And even with some of my living family members, I see how much of my mom and my dad that I have. But it was really comforting to me to learn some new things about my grandmother and to see how her, life and memory continues to be present within me. And knowing that those aspects of myself will continue to live on, in the coming generations, whether I have my own children or through my younger cousins, nieces, and nephews. But something that I really started to think about even more heavily this go around is just this circle of life, and how we are all connected. And I kind of look at life now as a ladder. So at one point, as a child, we're way on the bottom of the ladder. And then our parents are above us, grandparents above that. And for some of us with great grandparents, our great grandparents above that. And I think for a lot of us, our great grandparents probably passed, if we had the privilege of knowing them. They likely passed when we were pretty young, so we don't always think as much about it. But I do remember, memories of great grandparents. But as we get older, this transition happens, and we don't really realize it always until it slaps us in the face, really, and we have to face it. But in experiencing this loss of my grandmother, it has really sit pretty heavily with me, because it is in this moment that I realized how far up the ladder that I have moved. So now, with all of my grandparents being deceased and seeing my mom and her siblings, just standing over my grandmother's body, it I I always struggle the most to wrap my head around death and the essence of death and the significance and spirituality of death, and not in a negative way, but it's just so profound that it always just really gets me at my core. But it really just hit me that, like, okay, you think about it, my mom, we look at our parents a certain way, but then just knowing that the same, authority that you have over me as being the person that brought me into the world, when my grandmother was still alive, it's like that was your mom, and that's how I felt about it with my mom and her siblings. It's like, it's kind of crazy to be like, you're my mom, but your mom, like, you have a mom too, and your mom is still here. And so the same way that you try to tell me what to do, I'm going to tell my grandma on you so that she can get on you and tell you what to do. But just seeing that cycle and that connection come to a close, it made me realize that now my parents or my mom in this particular situation and her siblings are now in the place of my grandmother and what was my grandparents. So now I'm in that position of the parent, because my mom was the same age that I am right now when she had me. And although I don't have any children, I love my family. I love the kids in my family. And I definitely, step in as like the auntie slash, big cousin role. But just knowing that I'm at that place now, and it's like, okay, and life just moves so quickly. At one point, I remember growing up. I remember growing up, being a child, looking to my aunts and uncles. My sister and my first cousins are pretty significantly older than me. So a lot of times I was looking up to them as well. But just being in a position where now I have taken their spot, the place that I remember them being in when I was growing up. And now the little kids in my family, they have taken my former spot. And now I'm in that position of being responsible for them, of being that example for them, of, helping to care for them. And it's just so wild to me because I really want them to all stay connected to each other. So, I try to take pictures of them together. I don't live in my home state, so it's hard for me to really coordinate activities, but I definitely want to make that happen at some points in my life where I'm able to, get the kids together, have some family days, maybe even rent an Airbnb or whatever, so that everyone can come over for some family gatherings. But it's like I remember, or not even remember, but I still presently do look at pictures of when I was little. And to see, my older sister, my older cousins, my parents, grandparents, aunts and uncles, to all see them with me as a little kid or as a baby, holding me in pictures. It's just so crazy because it's like they remember me from a time that I don't even remember myself. And I know that's going to continue with the kids in my family. So I love taking pictures with them because I know they're not going to remember this, when they're my age. They're not going to remember all these times from being a baby or 4, 5, 6 years old. So I just think about how I'm now creating those mementos for them. Those pictures and those moments that they can look back on and be like, oh, wow, my auntie Kristen, she was holding me when I was a little baby, or here we were doing some silly stuff, or, my big cousin Kristen. And I think about how those are the memories, when I'm no longer here, those are the memories that they will have of me and the memories that they will have of me. But I also, on a more, downside of it, is knowing that now my mom and her siblings, and this also counts for my dad's side too, just speaking about my mom's side, since, it was her side of the family for this funeral service. But just knowing that now my mom has taken my grandmother's position. And the same way that she's standing over her mother's body, going ideally in the order of operations, it's kind of like next up would be me standing in her spot now. And of course, nobody really wants to think about that, but it's just kind of like, oh my goodness, we are at this point. My parents are getting older. I'm getting older. And it's a little bit scary to think, just with how quickly life goes by, to know that, seemingly in the blink of an eye, I'm going to be my mom's age now, and, having to process the emotions of losing parents. And that, like I said, I'll be standing in the same spot my mother was standing over her mother's body. But just hearing the words that my mother spoke about my grandmother. Someone at the service mentioned that we are living our eulogy right now. And that really stuck with me. And it makes me think about the life that I'm living. The legacy that I am creating to leave behind, the impact that I'm having on my family and my community. And that's something that I would even encourage you to think about for yourself. What type of memory and legacy do you want to leave behind? And it makes me think, I've thought about this before, but it makes me think about if I die, or when I die, what would be said about me at my service. And this is for the record, as of now, March 16th, 2022, 9 minutes into the day, as it's 12:09 a.m. I have thought about this as well. I don't like the sadness around funerals. I want my homegoing celebration to be just that, a celebration, a party. I want people to be at my house, play some music, pull out some pictures, reminisce, and just make it a time of goodness and joy. Because it's really hit me how I've come to understand death over the last few years. Really looking at it from a spiritual perspective and an ancestral perspective. It's sad, yes, that our family members or friends aren't with us here, those who have passed, that they aren't with us here in person. But just knowing that their spirit is still in existence, that their soul is still in existence. And in some ways, we're able to connect with them even greater in physical death than we are when they have physical life. And I feel the essence so strongly of, grandparents or older family members who have passed on. I feel their essence so strongly, just helping to guide me throughout this life. And as I mentioned before, knowing that that I am a living embodiment of them. Both literally with, parent or with grandparents, great grands, all the way, the whole lineage, all the way back. Just knowing that that's my bloodline and that they live through me. But also too, just traits and qualities, knowing certain characteristics that my ancestors have had, and even those that aren't related to me by blood, anyone who I always consider, anyone who had some type of influence over, my mindset, over the person that I became, or anyone who had any sense of responsibility in providing structure, shelter, and safety for me as a child and as an adult. Those are people that I know have influenced me in a great way, and I wouldn't be who I am today without them. And even in some ways, if that means that maybe our relationship caused some hardships that I had to overcome, I know that that also has been a part of my journey and a part of shaping me and who I am. But just some thoughts. These are just some thoughts that have come up for me over the last, week and a half or so. And I am just so grateful that I've come to a place of peace about life and death and making the best use of our time in life. Family to me is really important, staying connected to my family. And beyond my family, cultivating really sincere, genuine, loving relationships with my friends, and just showing up in the best way, in the most loving way that I can. And I think that's a legacy that I'm happy to share with many of my relatives. And in making those connections, it really, I'll say for me personally, it gives me a greater sense of pride in who I am and a greater sense of love for myself and who I am, and also who I am becoming in this life, because I know I come from greatness. And I know that I have so much to be proud of in where I come from. Again, good or not as good with some of my ancestors and maybe their qualities or characteristics, knowing that I have the opportunity to change some of those patterns, to break generational traumas, to transmute that energy, to transmute some of the struggle, to transmute some of the challenges in a more positive way, and to change the narrative for my family and for my bloodline. It's such an amazing thing, and such an honor to be in the place that I'm in. And I hope to be a part of this whole cycle, in this circle of life of being able to have a positive impact on the generations to come after me. But if any of you have had any similar kinds of thoughts, or even not, if not, I'd love to hear your comments, your thoughts and reflections on this topic. One other thing that I just thought about that I forgot to add is it was so heartwarming and just amazing for me to see what all came from my grandmother. And I know, of course, what came from her also came from, her parents and their parents and so on and so forth. But just being able to see in my lifetime with my own eyes what all came from my grandmother. My mom's side of the family is huge, especially extended family, but even just straight from my grandparents, from her having 3 kids, a whole there's a lot of us, as far as her kids, grandkids, and great grandkids. And just knowing that that we all come from her, it's like, wow. And that too makes me think about what will be left for me. Now, I've never really wanted or had a desire to give birth or anything like that, or have any biological children. I've always been more so interested in adoption. And I know that's kind of a whole other thing. But even so, it makes me think about what my family, if I do have children, what my family will look like. You know, if I'll be able to sit back and see several generations that have come, maybe not through me in the literal physical sense, but have come through me in a sense of a spiritual bond that we have with each other, and stepping in as a parent in a parental role, and still in a sense giving life and birth to other generations, as a form of support. But I just think that's so cool when you really think about it, to know that two people can be responsible for 10, 20, 30 other people. And I know, of course, we all come from a whole bunch of descendants, but even just the descendants that you can see in your own lifetime, if you live to a ripe old age, I feel like it's such a blessing to be able to see all of that. And in thinking about my grandmother, just knowing that she has several great grandchildren that were alive when she passed, but also two, just knowing that she had great grandchildren that are old enough to, from the youngest one is a baby, but just knowing that she has several great grandchildren who will be old enough to have at least some memories of her, from her oldest two or three, all being in their 20s. I want to say, the oldest three great grandchildren all being in their 20s, and knowing that they can say that they have memories of their great grandmother. I think that is so awesome. And again, that only makes me wonder about my life and what I will have as far as family, but also curious as far as what will become of, my mom's lineage, or my aunt's lineage, or like my sister, or older cousins, because they're at that point now where, my mom and aunt, their grandparents, and probably won't be anytime soon, because my oldest nephew's, I don't think he's worried about kids right now. But just know that they could also be great grandparents at this point in life, and that my sister could be a grandparent, which also, again, probably won't happen because until her younger kids are way older. But I think that's also cool to see how your family grows and how my individual family members' lineage grows. Because I'm kind of in between generations. Out of my first cousins, me and my younger brother and I are the youngest. There's a age gap between our other first cousins, but my first cousin's kids, and I hope I'm getting all this right. So my aunts and uncles' kids, their kids are actually, we're between them and their kids as far as age goes. So it's cool to be in that position, to be able to see it grow from both sides. And just to have all of these, little cousins and and nephews, and hopefully somewhere soon down the line, adding more nieces and nephews to it. But just to be able to see my family grow exponentially, I just love so much. And again, I try to take as many pictures as I can so that they'll all have something to look back on when they're older. But for real this time, end of the video, just some afterthoughts that I wanted to share. So peace out again.